Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And it's our pleasure and honor to welcome Charles Yu and Raelle Tucker. Charles Yu is the author of the novel Interior Chinatown, which just dropped on Hulu the season one just dropped on Hulu. It's fantastic and imaginative. And he also showran that room through COVID and the strike. So we are eager to listen to his expertise. And we are also very privileged to welcome Raelle Tucker, who kind of encompasses the whole remote phenomenon in writing now. She lives and works from Ojai, so she's out of the LA hub and nearby. And she also showran The Power for the last two, The Power and Sacred Lies. Were those the rooms that you ran remotely?
No, The Power I ran remotely, and then I ran a show called The Better Liar remotely for Amazon that did not shoot, but but both of those rooms were remote.
Okay. And I know on The Power, you shot on location as well while the room was remote. So I can only imagine all the challenges that came up there. So I guess my first question is, obviously COVID necessitated of running a remote room. So when you first got that directive, how did you already have your writing staff in place, or did you have to find people remotely? Like, how did you get the room set up to begin with? And I'll let either one of you take it first.
Carl, you take it.
Okay. Um, well, I think we found out early 2022. So I don't think there was ever any serious question. I think we're pretty much still in remote land then. So we just assumed that's how it would be. And it took a couple of months to read everybody and meet and staff up. And that was just, yeah, I think it was just I can't remember exactly when it lifted. We did try to do an in-person day or two with masks and stuff, and uh, we did it in the summer of 2022, and then somebody at that site, not on our room, tested positive. So after basically, I can't remember if it was the first or second day of a 3 day remote, I mean, of a on-site, we just went back to remote, aborted.
Charles, can you up your volume a little bit so we can?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's my body I need to up. I'm a little low energy right now. But no, okay. Is that any better?
Yes, much
Okay,
better. Thank you.
good. I'll just shout. What feels like shouting.
And in terms of, well, Raelle, do you want to add to that or?
Sure. So The Power was kind of an unusual situation. I ran a bunch of other shows prior to this, but we weren't just dealing with a show that was, yes, going to be shooting during COVID. I inherited The Power, which was a show that had mostly already been shot. And they were realizing at Amazon that they wanted to bring in somebody to reshoot and rewrite about 50% of the series.
Wow.
So, but it had been an international production and it had shot and it was posting and everything in London. And I was living in LA at the time that I took on this project. So, what that meant in this very weird way is I flew to London and I started looking through all the material that they had filmed in post for half the day, working with them. And then in my mornings, I was working with writers in Los Angeles,
Wow.
remote, rewriting while I was editing. So I was going, okay, there's a huge chunk of story that doesn't make sense here. Let's get on a call, a remote call with my writers and try to sort of write new scenes to fix what I'd seen in post. Which is a very specific kind of way of working that I had never done before. Um, and then the flip side of that was super unusual because once I had gone through the process of reshooting, I then moved back to LA, ran a room from here, and posted remotely with London on the other side. So I've
Oh my
had
gosh.
both sides of both running a room remotely and posting a show remotely.
So basically your home and office was like a CNN headquarters with like multiple screens and talking to different parts of the world. And That's so interesting that you had to take it over and then you were actually still working with the original material. So, I guess this kind of leads into like, when people talk about whether they like rooms, in-person rooms or remote rooms, a lot of the times people talk about chemistry of the writers and synchronicity of the writers. So if you're not actually all in a room together, does that impact the kind of writers that you hire? And how does that impact how you approach breaking story?
Raelle.
I mean, okay, could have been. How does that? Yes. So I'm always going to hire writers based on what's on the page, number one, and number two, what in their background life experience adds authenticity and knowledge that I don't have to the show, right? That's the main criteria. Having run a couple rooms remotely now, I would say there's a few things I would look for going forward that I didn't know to look for when I was hiring those rooms. I think people who are very strong pitchers is really important because you're not sitting in a room with a lot of downtime to think and muse and be quiet. If people aren't speaking up and comfortable doing that and getting to the point of what they're going to say, it becomes really frustrating as a showrunner to just hear yourself talk the whole time. That's not what I want to do. So if I had a couple quieter people in the room that in person would not have bothered me because we would have had more time to be comfortable with each other and get to know each other around, coffee. And I was running 4-hour rooms, asking people to do a full day's work in this period of time. And so I really needed people to be extremely good pitchers, extremely like vocal, but also respectful of other people when they're speaking, because when you overlap on Zoom, everything becomes chaos, right? So I think in an interview process going forward, if I knew I was going to run a remote room, I would pay really close attention to that interview process and how much they spoke, how well they spoke, and how our banter functioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's also, I mean, you just said a bunch of things that I probably kind of thought about, but articulated really well. I feel like one, I think we had a really collegial culture in our room, and it it was, I think, a bit self-selecting of like, it just felt like just who the group was, but I think Zoom made it even more so where people were really afraid to step on each other. And that can lead to a more stilted conversation than you want it to be sometimes. And we were so comfortable. I think we all liked each other. It was almost like we liked each other too much. Like we maybe people would have been a little bit more willing to go at it or step on each other just a little bit, but in Zoom nobody wanted to do that. And I think,
Right.
I mean, I don't think we suffered for that, but I do think it can just lead to a little bit of awkwardness. I would definitely hire less people with cats, because cats are very annoying on Zoom. No, I love cats. I don't know. I think, yeah, I think we had a pretty good culture, but I think what Raelle said is really true. Like the energy people really are so much more important then, because if we're especially like post lunch or on a hard day, it just gets kind of you just like you could tell everyone just sort of concrete, you know, just like low energy, sometimes, that I think would be harder to, I mean, it might be easier to break that in a room. You would just sort of wake everyone up a little bit.
So how would you handle if there was a conflict or a divergence of or just a non-consensus in terms of breaking story? And I realize both of you were working with existing IP, Charles, obviously from your book, and Raelle, you had a whole show, but in terms of taking to a new direction and breaking new ideas and how, because in the writer's room, you would have the writer's assistant, she would write on the big board, she or he would write on the whiteboard, and you would be able to kind of see the progress of the ideas. How did you do that remotely?
Well, my second show that I ran remotely, that one was more starting from scratch. And so we were working off of a book, but we were really free to generate whatever we wanted. from there. And I would say I didn't experience a lot of conflict in that room between people disagreeing so much on story. I think in terms of seeing it all, I tend to be a writer that holds a lot of stuff in my head. I think it was easier maybe for me than my room because I tend to do a lot of, yeah, I tend to be a structural person and can kind of move stuff around. We did have, my writer's assistant was really amazing. And we did have kind of I don't exactly know what software we were using, but there was sort of like a note board that was up on a part of the screen where she could move beats around for people. And we, there was sort of a breakdown on the screen that way. I think what happened for me when we ran into a place where things would get stuck or it didn't feel like we were working well. The great part of Zoom in a way was I would just break the room and I would say, okay, everybody go away for an hour. I'll see you guys in an hour. Think about these things, come back with actual ideas for how to fix the problem. And I would just let people go and work by themselves and then come back in with really purposeful, like I would be very clear, I want 2 ideas from everybody on how we're going to deal with this problem. You've got an hour, go think of them. Because that way I really could use the time we were all together in a really productive way instead of sitting there staring at each other on a screen, hurting our eyes for no reason.
Right. So it sounds like it was a more not siloed way of working, but basically instead of being physically apart in a room, you just let them go off and do their own thing. So it wasn't like a 4-hour consistent, we're all just here and we're all gonna just bat ideas off.
It was some days, but it was flexible, like there was a 6-hour window where my writers were on call basically from this hour to this hour of like, this is the time frame that is allotted to work. And then usually we were only in the room about 4 hours of those 6 hours. Then I tended to give everyone assignments for the rest of the hours of the day. So, we'd come in later in the morning, started at like 11:30. So people had mornings, they got have dinner with their families, but you also could use that time to really do actual homework stuff that could be brought back into the room.
Right. Charles, do you want to add to that?
A little bit. I think, I mean, generally we were a block of time, about 4.5 hours, probably something like that, maybe 5, but with lunch. And we kind of didn't vary too much from that. There was people were thinking outside of the room and bringing ideas for sure. But I think partly it was the first time I had run a room, and for it to be over Zoom, I think I was maybe a little bit just wanting to all be together instead of having the sort of maybe confidence or, willingness to just sort of parcel out things. I think if I could do it again, I definitely would have thought more about that, because I think one thing we learned when we tried to do that very brief on-site was how much it mattered to have a physical space to map things out. And I could just see the writers, I mean, they all said it too, just like, oh, like things are making sense, things are clicking in a way that it was hard for them because it was in my head, mostly, but it wasn't in their heads. And then also just, the kind of thinking you can do when you're thinking laterally or visually and can throw a card somewhere or just have a big mess up somewhere. We tried some of those tools, but I think they just don't work in the same way. I mean, they're great in some ways in terms of virtual whiteboards, but it's slower, it's clunky. So yeah, I'm not sure I have a good solution, or we figured one out, but we made it work, I guess, just the way we did.
So it sounds like your approach was more like we're all online for 5 hours and we're gonna hash it out. So kind of like I heard this expression like a Frankenstein sense, like we all put it together. We all put it together.
I think so. I think it was a lot of blue sky, a lot of like, because it was such a tough nut to crack from the book, and then to break the season together, it was all very, very interdependent. So it
Mhm.
was hard to parcel out until we sort of had the whole thing. And even then, there had to be a lot of, cross coordination across episodes after people got their episode assignments.
And having a remote room, did that affect the length of time for script assignments, or did that accelerate the timeline in any way? Like how did it overall affect the series coming together? I know also as showrunners, you also have meetings with the producers in the studio, and I imagine that's all happening remotely as well. So you probably had a really intense amount of eye fatigue. But how would you say being in a remote room impacts the timing that the studio gives you, or wrapping the show up all together as opposed to being physically all together?
I think for me, it probably slowed it down a bit. I think if you could be in a space and someone's down the hall and they're writing their episode, I mean, I guess people can write from home or whatever if you're in person, but just if you send someone off to work on a scene or something, or they're taking the morning to work, it just seems like you can have pop-ins or kind of like quick check-ins, and that would speed things up in a lot of ways. Whereas I think with the remote room, somebody had to go off and they get there, couple of weeks, and then even then sometimes would need more, and they then have to catch up on the room. I just think it made it harder overall to uh, lose someone for that time. They're really completely out of it. Whereas if we were sort of down the hall, maybe it would have been a little bit better, easier to kind of stay in the fold.
For me, I chose to do something fairly controversial. I mean, both situations were kind of weird. So the first one, this is before mini rooms this is the thing of the past, right? But I had 3 writers for the Power because we were rewriting like 50% of the show and we were just writing scenes. And so because I was in London and I'd be in post in the afternoon, I would spend my writers in LA would get up at like 8 a.m. in the morning and meet with me for like 3 hours. And I'd be like, here's what I've been working on in post all day. And then I'd say, spend the rest of your day. It'd be 11 a.m. for them. I'd be like, spend the rest of your day. These are writing these scenes. And I wake up in the morning and they'd be in my inbox. And so then I'd take the scenes they had written overnight and do a pass on them and put them aside. So I never lost anybody because we were sort of, Frankensteining an entire series that way. That's very unusual. But then the second show I ran was also super unusual because we knew the strike was coming. My show got greenlit over Christmas break, and I knew the strike was coming in the spring. And I believed at the time that if I handed in, I had to write 8 episodes, I had 2 written. I believed if I handed in the other 6 by the time the strike started, that would guarantee me that the show would survive. And I was really concerned, having been through strikes in the past, that would not happen otherwise. So I put everyone on this insane schedule. And what we would do is we would meet as writers for, sometimes it tended to be like when we were writing, by the time we were writing, after we had broken a lot of episodes, we were all writing at the same time, and we would meet from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. sometimes and go over stuff. But from the mornings and the evenings, I had everybody working on every script together. And each writer got their name on a script and they each got paid for their own script, but we kind of co-wrote the whole season in order to make it move fast enough so that I wasn't losing a writer from a room. I only had 5 people and my 5 writers total. I didn't want to lose anybody. And I wanted these scripts to happen fast. So we were kind of group writing the entire series. And we wrote 6 episodes, wrote the whole season, wrote 6 episodes in 14 weeks.
Oh my goodness.
Which was nuts. We killed ourselves, and I was running post-production on the Power in London at the same time remotely. So it was a batshit time.
Yeah.
After all of that, Amazon canceled the Power and didn't shoot the show.
Of course, right?
that fairy tale.
You're the embodiment of the expression. If you want to get something done, ask a busy person.
Felt like I didn't have a choice at the time, but lessons learned.
Yeah. And how did that affect, and did either or both of you actually bring your writers to set when the episode was shooting? Like, how did that work? Particularly you, because during COVID, like, did that give the studios more reason to say, no, we can't have the writer on set? How do you feel that affected that?
Oh, for me, we had a few of them, a couple of them came, a couple were just in other rooms already, so they weren't available. And we had our co-AP was on the whole time. So I think I do remember there was a little bit of like maybe pretext of like COVID makes it hard, but we pushed and they're like, yeah, they can come for their episode. And so we had the ones that were available were able to come. Um, I can't remember if that otherwise really affected us, but that was actually pretty smooth. I mean, we were wearing masks the whole time, obviously, but yeah, I wish I had something more interesting to say about that. I'm sure I'm forgetting detail. I've blocked it all out, if you can't tell. I'm just like talking off of like muscle memory now.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I brought one of my writers who worked on the mini room on the Power to cover all of the reshoots, which were 3.5 months of filming in Canada and London. Yeah. And so we moved around South Africa. We moved around a bunch and we were, dealing with all of the COVID restrictions. And they tried to push back on me bringing any writer to set. They did try to tell me that wasn't necessary. And I told them, you don't want to deal with what's going to happen if it's just me having to do all of this stuff by myself. Like you don't, you don't want that.
Right.
The actors don't need that. Like they need a consistent presence that's not running to try to be in post and be here and be there. They really need a dedicated person who can, in my opinion, who can really support them and knows the show and is constant. So I won that fight, thankfully.
Did you go on location when you were in different places?
So yes, I went and shot all of the reshoots. I was there, but I was also in post, working on episodes remotely while the show was shooting. So I was remotely editing while my, number two was on set, and then I would just come into set as much as I could, and we would both be there together. But sometimes we were shooting with multiple units, so she'd be there and I'd be somewhere else. And yeah, we traveled around to different countries, and all of that changed. COVID restrictions changed in every country. It was.
Oh my God, that must have been bewildering. And did the studios fly out, like the individual writers whose episodes were being shot, or was it your number two who was kind of managing all that?
So by this point, there had been writers that had written parts of the episodes before I inherited them in the previous incarnation, and then I had rewritten pieces. It was like, in terms of ownership of who these episodes were, they belonged now to everyone. And so no, there were no remaining writers left from the previous versions. It was me and my number two at that point.
Okay. So let's say we're in an ideal remote environment and it's an ideal situation where you're working on your own show and there's no COVID, there's no strikes. It's just, we have financing and everything is great. What's your ideal remote room? And why do you think a remote room is better or has advantages over a physical room? That's kind of a two-part question.
Ideal in terms of geographic location?
Just ideal for in terms of like the studio gives you a bunch of money and says, go make the show. The only thing is that it's a remote room.
I think I'd want to be in Ojai. So Raelle is apparently living my dream. I'm also working with someone right now. She's living in Oahu. That seems pretty good too. That makes it tough on time zones. But I mean, I feel like sorry if I'm missing your question, Kim, but like I feel like it'd be a couple of weeks in person, or even a week to get to know each other and get comfortable. And then a probably a slightly on the smaller side room. I mean, our room was wonderful, but we had also our, assistants were part of the room. And so we had like a dozen people on Zoom, and the squares get small and it gets, you really are then a lot of like waiting in line to talk. So, I mean, 7, 8 seems more manageable, but, I'm not like dogmatic about the numbers, just being mindful of like how many people are on a Zoom. But I think now my ideal is hearing Raelle talk. I'm like, yeah, use the time. Like, why are we sitting here for 5 hours in a row? Like, we can pop on and off. You can, people can jump in and out. Like, use it like that, almost like we're in a kind of virtual office. And I don't know, maybe there can be 2 rooms, maybe there can be sub rooms, and yeah, no more.
Breakout rooms.
Yeah, I think so. I think I would just be much more flexible and creative and think of it just as if we were all together and less about let's all sit on a Zoom for 5 hours.
For me, I actually I will probably choose to run at least part of my rooms going forward remotely for the rest of my television career. And the reason for that is because I want to not have to live in Los Angeles. And I don't hate Los Angeles. It's not that. I just, mental health, productivity, all of that for me is about not being in the chaos. And I'm just more creative and I work better as a writer. So knowing that now about myself after doing this, that means if I have the control over how I staff my shows, I would say I agree. I think about 6 writers for me is the perfect balance on a short order show, like 8 episodes. And I definitely want my assistants in the room. So, we're only usually at max 8 people in the room, maybe 9. And I would run never more than a 4-hour actual day of Zoom. When we're first breaking story, I think that's, and like blue skying, that's the time where we're sitting in the room the longest all together, right? And that is the time where you're kind of like, you want everybody's brain cells working and like all of us getting to know each other because we're all first getting in the room for those first few weeks of blue sky and figuring out. But I think for me, the way a room works well remotely is giving people license, like to spend their time outside of the room, trusting that they're going to do the things that I ask them to do and giving them things to do, but not controlling when they're doing them and how. So giving homework, like, I'll let you be in the room. We're in the room for 3 hours a day, but you're going to go home and write 3 scenes. Like, and you're going to have 2 days to turn those in, outside of the time. And trusting that people can work when they want to. If they want to get up early, if they want to work at night, if they want to do whatever, they're only having to show up for me for dedicated, focused time where we're really not talking about anyone's cats. We're not talking about the weather. There's no small talk really, which can be a little unfriendly, but the truth of it is I'm trying to be merciful to everyone's brain so that they don't have to sit here and stare. So I'm really sort of disciplined about, like, we go around the room once and we say, what's up in your life? What's going on? Couple minutes at the top of the day of just like catch us all up on what's happening in your life. And then we all just jump straight into work until the steam runs out. And when the steam runs out, I kind of say, all right, everybody, that's the end of this. Here's a bunch of stuff for you to do. And that's kind of how I'm going to go forward in the future. I would like to have like Charles said, I would love to say, let's meet in LA for 1 week and, all sit in a room together and get to know each other. And then after that, we're going to go to some hybrid, remote room.
I mean, that sounds much more kind of intuitive to like the predominant writer profile, right? Like we have these bursts of needing to be together and socialization, and then we're all like these introverts that need to go off and do our own thing. It seems kind of it seems much more authentic in a way. I guess that's the word I'm coming up with. Is there anything you missed or miss about having an in-person room?
Oh my God, yes. Like, thing, I can sell it to you guys all day. I like a remote room. I love that this exists. I like that we can work with people all over the world. I love that we can have the freedom to not have to be all in the same spot. But you'll never replicate the camaraderie that you feel. And yeah, I'm bonded to my writers that were in remote rooms. We like each other a lot. We've met like once, some of them, but and I feel close, but it's not the same. Of like, that feeling of community, of like, the laughter, the like, that you just can't get the same level of that out of a remote room. Um, for better or worse, there is less conflict. Like, as a showrunner, I've seen writers get on each other's nerves, or if they start to get on my nerves. That doesn't happen very as much in a remote room.
Mhm.
They have some conflict, but I miss also the passion that comes from people, being around each other all day and getting really invested in the work that way.
Yeah, I second all that. I agree. I feel like there's also um the accidental stuff, of like if you're having lunch and someone says they are goofing off and then a pitch comes out of that, or you go to whatever, go to your office or go to the bathroom and you think of something. And I think there's a little more sort of serendipitous stuff that could happen. I mean, it's, who knows, but um I think the camaraderie is the big part though. Yeah. And I agree I mean, I feel like our group was really tight and we all love each other, but we probably love each other even more if we had spent some physical time together. And I don't know. I feel like there's also, you know, it can be lonely even though you're spending time together. Like there's something just as a human being, a little bit more time, even though I'm perfectly happy in a Zoom room. I feel like I'm told that other people enjoy human contact. So
I think it's also, yeah, I mean, this is a benefit towards a Zoom room again. I think it's also, for me, it's physical, like, as much as it's not healthy to stare at a screen, less time sitting was great. So like we spend less time doing this. So I would, get up and do an hour of exercise in the middle of the day, like something that I would never do in the writer's room. I would never be able to pull that off, but because
You,
I'm
you couldn't bring in a treadmill into the writer's office, into the writer's room and just take turns.
I've heard of people doing this, but no, not for me. So yeah, I mean, there was more. I felt like in a certain way my mental health was actually better taken care of being in a Zoom room than it was in a writer's room where I'm spending 7 or 8 hours a day just in this sitting down with this group of people for
Yeah.
months.
yeah, yeah. Physically, it's got to be worse. Sitting is so
Yeah,
bad.
sitting is death. Rael, did you ever encounter a situation where you were in different time zones and you had to convene with your writers remotely? How did that work? Did people have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning or?
No, I mean, so I was on staff for a really long time before I ran shows, and so I can't put writers through stuff that I would have been pissed about. So I tend to, maybe in a bad way, I tend to take on more than I should because I'm trying to spare them from having to do crazy stuff. But no. So when I was in London, like I said, so they would have to get up, they'd have to be in a room at 8 a.m., which is on a Zoom room at 8 a.m. because that was the only way I could make it work. But I kept from 8 to 11, 5 days a week. And they were then sent to write from home, usually about a couple scenes a day that they had to work on outside. So they were working a pretty decent schedule. Like I'm sure they were having dinner with their family and they maybe had to go to bed early.
Right.
So no, I've never asked people to get up in the middle of the night. I've gotten up in the middle of the night to be on post with London while I was in LA or in Ojai. I would get up at 5 so I could be in post at 6 a.m. and in color corrections and VFX meetings and things like that. Talking to them because they were on a different schedule and there were way more of them and I was trying to accommodate that process.
Right. So that you mentioned something that I want to pick up on. Do you think consciously or subconsciously, because you were running a remote room and because people were coming from disparate places, do you feel like you took on more as a showrunner because it was remote? Or do you think it didn't really affect things. And then leading into the second question of post, how did you handle post work if you needed to get back in touch? Well, I don't even know if do they even keep writers on during post now? I think they kind of don't, but
Not for me.
so maybe that's a moot point. But in terms of your kind of creative load
Yeah,
running a remote room, how do you think that affected that?
I think it is. I think you put your finger on something that's definitely true. There's just things that I wouldn't bother calling, our number two. She's amazing. She would have had much better ideas than I would have about a lot of things. And if she were just sitting in the office next to me, I probably would have asked her, but I'm not going to want, phone call. It's so awkward. I mean, it's not, but it just feels like a little bit of a barrier, right? And like, I'll just do it myself or I'll think of it. And I think the same goes probably for writer's assistant, and for just if there's people around that it would be fun to just riff off or ask them to make a list of something or do a little bit of research or think on something. And I just probably, yeah, it's harder to team it out when you're sitting in your house alone. At least for me, I think that's right. And I also feel like in general, yeah, you just sort of think of it more like as a kind of solo activity, and then I jump onto Zoom for a few hours a day and then jump off. So
I think I ended up doing more rewriting myself than I typically have done on other shows. And that was partially maybe because the way both of these shows were crazy and chaotic and timelines, and I didn't have a lot of leisurely time to like play around. And I was like, okay, give it back to somebody else to take a pass on if I'm rushing toward a deadline. So that could be a factor. But I think it was also, yeah, it felt like a more solo activity. Whereas some of my other shows, I would turn to my number two or three even, and say, hey, take a pass on, the staff writer's script before I take a pass on it. Like, do a little, tweak this scene. Do you have some thoughts? Instead, I would just take it all and just run it through my computer because I think mostly because I didn't want to wait for them to take a pass and then have to do another one. And maybe also just being alone all the time, it was just natural to me to just take that work on.
mm.
Yeah, you didn't have like a running thread, like a DM message with like your number two or with the writers on set, or not set, or the writers in the room. So like once the 4 hours were up, that was it. Everyone shut down for the day and you didn't reconvene.
I mean, I would talk to, like, if writers were, like, oh, what happens, what are we carrying through? There were questions that would come up for sure. And I would be available at any point to answer, to talk to anybody until bedtime. So yeah, sometimes I would get a call, sometimes I would get texts, or there was some of that going on. And I had a great number two who was constantly checking and being like, what can I do? What can I do? But maybe I was a little more selfish with the workload, just because like I said, I wasn't really thinking. I was just thinking of getting it done as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the prevalence and the continued use of remote rooms is going to affect how studios formulate budgets for writing rooms and stuff like that? Do you sense that happening as we stay alive till 25?
I mean, yeah, we would hope that the savings go into the show, but I don't know, right? I mean, or go into the salaries of the room participants, but yeah, it feels like you can build that in, because I think a lot of people, including me, prefer the remote room. So you can, I mean, unless you sort of know, I guess, going in, which, to your point, if you know going in, yeah, we're doing this remote, I kind of have a sense of what the budget should be if you had to put up an office. So let's get some of that back, for this room. But yeah, I don't know. It's a good question.
I can imagine. I mean, how would it not? They're cutting corners in every other direction possible. And, why would they not be doing that? I haven't heard of anyone yet since COVID who's been forced to have a remote room. Like I know a lot of people who've done in person or mixed level, in person 3 days a week and then 2 days a week remote kind of rooms. I haven't heard of anyone being like, you cannot have an in person. I haven't had a room since the strike myself, so I haven't faced this issue. I do know that when I did staff my last room remotely, I asked if I could take some money that they were budgeting into hiring an additional writer, and they kind of hemmed and hawed about it. And I don't think that that was something that they were going to give me. But I think you could make a real argument for it, and I think it's worth doing. I think it's worth if you know you're going to run remotely, say this is how much I know we paid for our offices, and this money should be going to hiring an additional writer or assistant or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
It's worth fighting for it, trying.
Yeah. So both of you see yourselves Raelle, you've already said that you would prefer to run remote rooms. So Charles, going forward, would you choose to run it remotely or in person?
I think remotely. I mean, I live in Orange County and it's far enough that I'd be 3 to 4 hours to round trip drive to LA where most people, unless, writers really want to drive down to Irvine, which they don't. Yeah, and it just gives more flexibility. I mean, I had a before the room, we had a kind of 4 week mini room, and it was a writer in New York that I was mostly working with. And so that was great. I don't know that we would have gotten to do that. And as I mentioned right now, kind of staffing up a mini room, and my partner is in Hawaii. And yeah, I don't know how it would work otherwise, so
Right.
yeah, you just can get so much more flexibility in terms of who can join.
So it sounds like running a remote room, you get a lot of efficiency, but you miss out on the conviviality and the kind of the connective tissue of the community, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think I've never been more efficient than I was on these last two shows.
Yeah.
But I did, yeah, there is definitely some magic and camaraderie that's lost. And I think, I don't know, my writers aren't here to speak to their experience of me, right? Like I don't know what it was like for them. I know I was in the thick of it, and it might have been a really intense work environment for them. Like I don't know. I try to really care about what the experience is for everybody, but there's a certain level where, as a showrunner, one of the things you learn when you come up on a staff is that the minute you become a showrunner, you're no longer like one of the team in the same way, and you experience the work environment completely differently, right?
Yeah.
So I hope it wasn't like a terrible, grueling experience for my writers to work remotely, because we were really efficient. I know I can be a lot like nicer and warmer and pleasant if we're in person than I would be when I'm really trying to just get shit done in 3 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, do you have anything else you want to add about anything, any areas I didn't cover?
One tiny weird thing, and I'm not a comedy writer at all, but I do wonder how it works because there's a tiny lag, and I just feel like the flow of a conversation must be so different for a comedy room.
Right.
I'm so curious if comedy writers find that to be true.
Well, we do have a comedy writer. We have a couple of comedy writers, and they're going to talk about the experience of being in a remote room. Because I also had that question: how do you do a comedy room if you're not all there and ripping off jokes and whatnot? So, for drama, I get it because it's you're kind of siloed already in a way, but for comedy, that requires so much interaction. So thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing your experience with us. I'm just going to open up the Q&A, see if there's something. Oh, so one question was, and Raelle, you can probably speak to this beautifully. How did you manage the stress? Besides all the time that you're online dealing with creative issues, and then you're online dealing with business issues with business people. So basically you're online all the time and you're juggling time zones and everything. How did you manage the stress?
This is the best advice I can give anybody who's ever going to run a show. Sleep is so important. Like, do not like you have to prioritize sleep. You have to give yourself enough out time to get really solid sleep. And if you aren't a good sleeper, anything that you can do to help yourself get a solid night's rest. Like use all the tools possible. I think that's so important to be able to, just even have your brain working well enough to break story and do your job, but also just you'll lose your mind very quickly if you don't sleep. And a lot of showrunners are so stressed out that they can't sleep.
Mhm.
So exercise will help with the sleep. Not drinking caffeine after like early afternoon. And I became a meditator when I became a showrunner, and I'm not spiritual or religious in any way. I really went at it from because of the neuroscience, and I really, really suggest for all writers, like this is something so incredible to look into as a tool to like learn to control train your brain so that it can stop just constantly yabbering at you all the time and driving you nuts, because that just brings up all your stress levels. It's like learning to work it like a muscle.
Right.
Has really life changing.
Such good advice. I wish I'd had it. I am the cautionary tale, honest. I was going to ask Raelle if how did you do all that? Because I wasn't posting a different, I mean, like what you were doing, it sounds insane. It makes actually now me feel much better about what I tried to do. But honestly, and maybe this will scare some people out there, maybe you all know, but there are nights where I was setting my alarm for 2 a.m. I was going to bed at midnight. I'm like, well, there's only so many hours before call time. I got to do a rewrite. And so,
Wow.
I'm just gonna get up at 2 a.m. and it was terrible. Brains don't work on 2 hours of sleep, not
No.
after night, obviously. So yes, it after a while it catches up and you know, one way or another it'll get you. So what Raelle said is so important.
Right. And just as a last question, what percentage of rooms do you think are going to continue to be remote? Is this like an industry-wide trend that you see?
Hmm, good question.
A lot of my friends are having in-person rooms. I mean, a lot of my friends just aren't working right now. There are way less rooms than there's ever been. So I want to put that in context. But most of the friends that I have are at least in partial in-person rooms. I don't know anyone right now that's in a full remote room. I'm sure there are plenty of them, but just in my circle, that is not happening to the degree it was from 2020 to 2023.
Right. Well, that sounds ideal to have a week to get to know each other and hang out and then go off and do your work and then maybe come back for like a closing party or whatnot.
Yeah.
Cheers to it being done. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us and giving us your time. We talked about this a little bit was, for those of you who are in comedy rooms, what was the experience of being in a remote comedy room? How did you get your jokes and how did you get that similar vibe without being physically present with each other?
Who are the comedy writers here?
Stephen and Richard.
Oh, it's
Oh,
just us.
it's just me and
Okay.
Beef. Beef, you go first, man. Talk
Okay.
about it.
I am going to stay a comedy writer since I worked on the first part of Power and apparently it didn't go very well. Um, I'm kidding. I did not work on that show. Uh, I had the luck of having my first remote room be season 7 of Blackish. So I had been there since season 1 as script coordinator. I got staff season 3. We all knew each other. There were only 2 new people. We knew the show. The challenge was COVID. Like, okay, we can only have 3 people in a set, but luckily our show works with only 3 people in a set. So it was that challenge as much as learning how to talk to your iPad. And we had such a comfort that people were like, if we didn't know each other, this would not work.
Mhm.
And we all had the joke of like, oh, I told a joke and I thought it was on mute, but no, it just wasn't funny. And you learn that specific skill that you learn in your first comedy room, which is how to pitch, how to listen, how to get a reaction, and it's just a different muscle.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything that Beef is saying. I think, I think Raelle was saying a version of something that I found was helpful that we did on when I worked on Single Drunk Female was like having a couple of weeks with everybody in person was really huge. It's kind of Beef had it in a different way because he'd been on the show for 6 years, kind of knowing everybody's speed, everybody's tempo a little bit, everybody's vibe helps a lot for sure. I think, and I mean, also like the showrunners were saying, like, is it quite as good or quite the same as being in person? No, and I'm sure showrunners will disagree, but and I'm biased because like I'm not in LA, but I go to LA for productions necessary, of course, and I've done when I was on this most recent season of Grownish with Beef, I would be on Zoom and then I would go to LA for like a month or two sometimes, so I did a mix of it all. But I think it's still you get pretty close. I think a lot of the times, funny is still funny. I think sometimes in a weird way, if you can make people laugh on Zoom, you can definitely make them laugh in real life, So you just kind of figure it out, to be honest, in my opinion.
So
It, oh,
go ahead.
it was interesting because I came on to Grownish season 5, and then Richard came back season 6. I think I got that right. And so I came in and there were a bunch of people I didn't know. I was coming in mid-season. I was kind of like Matt Damon and Saving Private Ryan. They've been through this hell, and I'm like, "Hi guys, we gonna do some new stuff." And it's learning. It was learning the same things and learning the new rhythm of the room and the new showrunners and all that sort of thing. And then on season 6, they were back in person, and I was in upstate New York. Now I was there for the first week in person to kind of get a feel for everything, but then it was just I'm at a TV screen at the end of the room, and for a lot of time so was Richard. And every time a writer would be out of the room and remote for the day, if they had like a doctor's appointment or had to travel, they'd say like, "How do you do this? How do you respond when there's a room full of people talking and you're the person who's not there?" And the answer is you just learn to.
So how do you, and I'll open this up to everyone, but how do you break story in a remote room? Because we all have to wait our turn, and there's none of that easy kind of banter that happens in a physical room. So how do you break story in a way that still feels creatively interesting or spontaneous?
Personally, I think it's pretty challenging. I've been in a couple of remote rooms, and you figure it out. Like you find a way to do it. And with each room I was in, it was different. There's certain rooms it's like, oh, we're going to use Miro, or we're going to use this platform, or we're going to use nothing. Or we're going to start using this and then we all kind of forget about it. That happened a few times. So it's like there's always a different language, but I find it really, really challenging. Like I think you really have to hold a lot up here, and you're already being asked to do a lot when you're staring at a screen for several hours a day. But it does work. It's not my preference. I think that I'm probably saying that without saying it, but it works. It can work.
Well, yeah, just to add to that too, I'm glad you said Miro Kara, because for us, I'm kind of like you. It's just very hard to break story on Zoom, but I found Miro, that application that we all use for our room, just to be game changing, because at least everyone has like something
There's
that we can,
something.
yeah, something that everybody, no matter where you're at, can just look at a couple cards or a picture or whatever it is, or a little write up. So that was pretty monumental for us.
What is the program called? Miro?
Yeah, Miro.
Is that like the equivalent of a digital whiteboard?
Basically, yeah. So you can basically have little note cards and you can, kind of whatever you want.
Right.
I feel like I worked on I feel like 4 different shows during COVID. I feel like everybody kind of like what Carl was saying, everybody did something different. Like some people used Writers Room Pro, some people
I had
did
that on one room.
nothing,
Yeah.
some people did Miro, there was another one. I can't remember. Some people did Microsoft Word, you know what I mean? You did it, or you did a mix of all of them. I think you just kind of like everybody, I think a common theme for everybody, it seems like that's emerging, it feels like, is that, you just kind of get used to it, and you kind of begin to wade in and you figure it out. And you find like, again, like the showrunners are talking about, you find that you have to be vocal and you know how to pick and choose those spots and all that kind of stuff. And like we're figuring out on this Zoom right now, you know what I mean? You just got to begin to get a feel for it.
And how do you think this affects your relationship with the showrunners? And kind of, as you go in your careers, I mean, obviously, writers who are starting out at the bottom as staff writers or story editors, they're obviously worried about, you know, the lack of physical interaction, but also for you all, I mean, you all have a lot of experience, but if it remains remote only, how do you feel that affects your relationship with showrunners and going forward in your careers?
I mean, I
Well, I
don't
mean,
know. Oh,
yeah. Go ahead, Karen.
okay. I'm not sure that it affects it if it necessarily will affect it too much. I mean, I was on 3 different shows that were remote. One of them we were always remote, even though I met some of those people in person later, including the showrunner, but we never had like an in-person room at any point. The other one that I had that I was on that was always remote, that one was a little bit more difficult, and I feel like because we never actually met in person, I don't really feel like I had much of a rapport with the showrunner, and I found his sort of process a little bit distancing and strange. So that one was actually the hardest one that I was on. He also tended to think like a math teacher, and I don't at all. So that was very challenging. And that was the one room where I also realized something I really missed from being in person. Sometimes you just need a moment to go into someone else's office and close the door and say, "Was that weird?" And even if you're like both are like, "Oh yeah, but it's cool, it's whatever, it's what it is," it's just healthy. It's like you really need like others places to like download and like process what you just said. When your faces are all like this at all times, there's just no opportunity for it. And I feel like you kind of miss a lot just as a person, not only as a writer.
Did you all use chat for that reason, like with certain people in the room? Did you have like little side conversations?
Oh yeah, the side camera. I mean, I don't want to divulge the secrets of the regular writers if the showrunners are still on, but the side chats be popping off, yo. It's a thing, and the showrunners can tell. I'm sure they can tell. You know, I think,
The eyes moving.
yeah,
I'm
for
I'm
sure.
texting
I
right now.
think.
You can't even tell.
I mean, you know, you try to definitely keep it to a minimum, of course. I think like again, like it's not the same, which we keep saying, but like you know, you do find like when I came back for Grownish for season 6, there was a lot of people that I didn't know because I hadn't been there since season 2. But like after a couple of weeks, it always takes a little time, but somebody will text somebody like, "Yo, so that thing in the room, blah blah blah," and like that becomes like the equivalent of like what used to be the lot walk if you were in person. You know what I mean? And like you don't want to do it while you're in the room, of course, but when you go on a break, you go somebody go and text you up or the group thread go and light up or whatever, you know, and obviously you don't want those things to become distractions or toxic or whatever. And most of the time they don't. But like people are you're gonna find the people hopefully that like you kind of vibe with in a room even still. And like if you're a lower level, I think don't be afraid to reach out to that person. You know what I mean? Probably not the showrunner because they have 1,000 things going on in their brain. You know, I tend to think that most of the time, this is something that I kind of learned more when I was a baby writer, is that most of the time the showrunner's not even thinking about you. You know, they like you think they noticed that script that you had or you didn't do the thing or the X or the Y or whatever. Like they ain't even think about you. They think about the show and maybe their family or whatever they got in their personal life. So that's something I try to tell myself even now. You know what I mean? Unless you really clearly drop the ball, like it's not about you, you know. But it definitely can be a challenge, and I would imagine it is a greater one if you're like a lower level writer in the room.
For
Yeah, just to
sure.
add that too, I would say, I mean, like Carl, like the last show I was on, I had the privilege of knowing the showrunner personally and being in a
Mhm.
physical room before moving over, so that was um much easier to having conversations. But I think theoretically, I'd say you're well within your rights to, you know, if you're a lower level writer and you're new to a Zoom room, you're well within your rights to, you know, at whenever you feel comfortable to just ask them, say, hey, can I take 5 minutes of your time and just say, hey, how am I doing? Like anything you
Hmm.
have, you know, do you want me to speak up? Am I speaking too much? And you know, it's on them if they want to tell you their honest feedback or not, but it's well within your rights to ask because that's how, you know, that's how you get asked back is just trying to, you know, make sure you're reading the room and really understand what the showrunner needs.
Mhm.
I think that that's like good advice no matter what room you're in. And I think it's probably harder to access it when you're in a remote room, but I think that's a really good point. I often would think about who's the number 3. If you can kind of pinpoint that person, like they're very experienced, but they don't have quite as much stress as 1 and 2. And I mean, if they're there, people help them too, so they want to be helpful as well. So yeah, you definitely want to be in communication and asking those questions. I think that's a great point.
That's really well said, I think, Cara. It's Cara, right? Am I saying it correctly?
It's Kara, but that's okay.
Kara,
Oh
okay.
no, Kara. I
Sorry, I was like, which one did I say?
Kara.
Oh, second
Kara.
guessing
That's
that.
Kara, that's very well said. I totally agree with what you just said. I
Thank
apologize for
you.
mispronouncing your name.
No worries, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I was able to, again, I said there were 2 new people on Blackish season 7, and one of them was a lower level writer who didn't know anybody, and I was like, hey, you want to chat on the phone? And like, hey, anytime you feel weird or like, did that go well? Give me a call. Like, you're doing great. Like, you really are doing great. Just keep doing what you're doing. And doing that with people is such a, just, hey, that was a great joke. You know, that's a text you can send over Zoom a little more slyly than in the room being like, you know, so
Yeah.
it's just building people up really goes a long way.
Yeah.
For sure.
100%.
So when we were talking with the showrunners, I asked them if they felt that running a room remotely led them to either subconsciously or consciously take on more of the burden of writing for themselves. And I'll ask you the same question. In terms of writing remotely, how does that affect you creatively in terms of how you pitch ideas or the risks that you take or kind of all the decisions that you make that you might have done differently if you were physically together? Is there any impact?
Speaking just for myself, I think that I tend to be a little bit more, I don't want to say focused, like I'm not focused when I'm in person, but a little more regimented maybe in some of my thinking. Like I'm like, what are the pitches that I want to do? What are the things maybe I want to wait until this other day? I think I just think about how I'm going to sort of contribute to the room a little bit more in a different way than when I'm in the room where I feel like it's kind of freewheeling. It's, oh my God, I just got this amazing idea. It just doesn't quite feel, at least for me, I don't quite feel that free on Zoom. So I think I do a lot more planning, maybe I would say, before going into a room on Zoom.
Less room bits for the comedy folks. You know, you can do more physical things in person that can lighten the tone, or, you know, just kind of be the energy. And finding the energy on Zoom is a different skill.
Yeah.
But you know, it finds a way.
I feel like I developed, you know, like my chair room bits a lot more
Yeah.
like on Zoom.
Oh, that's nice. That's good.
You know what I mean? You gotta find it or whatever, you know. But no, I think that's correct for
A
sure.
lot of Bob Newhart talking to someone who's not there, like, no, I can't right now. I'm sorry. That's very important. I eventually.
Yeah. So
So we've talked a lot about kind of the adjustments that you have to make. What do you like about remote rooms?
I like the commute. Like a lot.
Yeah.
I really like not being in traffic or having to deal with strangers. That's just fun. I like being able to sleep later and get up later. So I mean, things like that, just sort of the like kind of crazy conveniences of it. That for me, I do like, and there's not much to compare with that.
yeah, I mean, for me, it probably sounds a little obvious, but I enjoy the flexibility of not having to be in Los Angeles. You know, I love LA. I feel like I moved to LA and a lot of my dreams came true in Los Angeles. I'll always have a footprint in Los Angeles, but like for me, it's afforded me the opportunity to be able to be closer to family, to be out of the city and just, you know, it's a privileged opportunity to be to try to swing it, you know, but I'm grateful for that. I think, you know, Raelle was talking about being able to work out on your lunch, you know, it was like huge little things like that. You know, I just feel like, you know, if you bring the focus to the room the way that you need to, and it can be done. You know, like there definitely is a beauty to being in person, whether it's comedy or drama, I would imagine, you know, but like I think, you know, I think I think a hybrid model for me is what I love. I love coming in a month in
That's nice.
person, a couple weeks in person, maybe splattering that out throughout the season a little bit, you know, but just even for other people, like if you know, like you gotta take your kids to the doctor, you gotta, you know, it's just allows for people to have a little bit more life, which I think is important. You know, I care a lot about my career and the art and everything, but you know, you wanna You don't live the work, or at least I don't, you know. It should be the other way around, hopefully, I think. And maybe I shouldn't say that, but you know, that's what I think.
Happy people make better writers.
In theory, you know.
I mean, I love a Zoom rewrite. It is, especially for comedy, it is so much more efficient. You take your 3 people, you go in, you have the script right on the screen. You have a very talented assistant who should be a writer anyway. And you just go boom, 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 boom. Here's what we're doing. Do. And I ran a lot of rewrites, and it was like, this is what we need for this scene. What do we have? And you get some great stuff from people who are focused, especially if it's someone who maybe not feel comfortable speaking in the bigger room. They're lit up in a smaller room, and they get to get those reps and get that feel. That's really, really important.
That's really cool. Like, I don't know if I don't know if that's just a comedy thing, but I definitely never had like the rewrite experience on Zoom. That sounds really cool. But you also bring up the point about the split room, which I think is also really cool. And then you can like break it up, and then sometimes people kind of come alive in a way. There's only 3 people as opposed to like 6 or 7. I think that's pretty cool.
And it gives upper levels like Richard and I a chance to run a room. If we haven't before, and like, oh, okay, this works, this doesn't work. This is definitely a way, and report back to the showrunner like, hey, you're not getting enough out of so and so. They're killing it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
But that wouldn't happen in a physical room. Like, you wouldn't go off to like a side office and do that.
It depends on the show.
Yeah.
And like the space you have. Like, because if you don't have enough physical space, you can't really do that. I've just been in many different spaces, some smaller than others, but there's something kind of really efficient about it. It's just like, oh, we're going to split off today because we want to take care of that over there and that over there, and then we'll come back tomorrow and put it all together. There's something. It just feels like it's kind of made, the format is made for that a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, it definitely seems primed for efficiency, better or worse.
Yeah. And I think it also is helpful. Steve alluded to this a little bit. Like, it's just helpful. And I think Raelle said a version of this, like, some in comedy, I don't know how it works for you good people over in drama. Like, I think sometimes there's a tendency, and it's fine. That's how the showrunner wants to work. I'm with it. I'm here. I serve at the pleasure of the queen or the king, but like, adapt the format to what we're in. You know what I mean? If we on Zoom, maybe we don't always need to do it. Like, we just sit here for 9 hours and look at the computer screen. You know what I mean? Like, and that's fine. Again, if you want to rock that way, I'm gonna rock that way because that's what I'm here to do. But like, I'm also down for like you're talking about giving out homework or whatever. Like, I ran a mini room for 4 months on an Amazon thing or whatever, and like, I had a writer. Like, Zoom was just not for them. You know what I mean? And I recognized that, and I was like, yo, homie, go off work on this outline, send it to me later tonight. You know what I mean? You got to be like a coach, man, like, and just figure out, I mean, it's show running anyway, but figure out how to get the most out of your players. And sometimes that means you got to adapt your system, I think that's something that is really important on Zoom personally.
Such a good point.
Did the rooms that you were in, do they use platforms like Teams or Slack or?
Not for me.
No, we just kind of chat.
You just use chat.
Yeah.
And the infamous side chats.
Yep. And
by the way, I think
is
to the chat.
So I just the script program app, Scriptation, which you can just share notes, PDFs. It just makes it so much easier than having to run to the copier.
Right.
When you don't have one.
Exactly.
Noah, what were you gonna say?
I was just joking. I would, in my experience, I would keep all the chats on your phone because I remember a couple times I would do a side chat with the wrong person. And I'm like, or someone would send me something, and I'm like, what? Like, what are you talking? Oh, I know you.
Yeah.
Oh, I know this is going to. So
we lost our chat privileges on Blackish because we were just for bits. And it was like, guys, I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I bet y'all were wilding out over there, man. Yeah, and like, pro tip, I mean, this might be obvious. Don't use the Zoom chat for nothing. Like, I don't. That thing is recorded. I'm not even saying if you're saying anything crazy. Like, even if it's like on like Room Business or whatever, it's just like you just don't know, man. You just don't know.
Yeah.
Anything in writing is forever, right?
For sure. I mean, simple things like, if you simply have a question or, I think that's cool. But yeah, I agree with Noah. I feel like for like real side things, and take it off Zoom.
Definitely.
Safety.
Definitely.
And in terms of like, always looking for the next job, do you feel like your time in the remote rooms allows you to have that kind of relationship where people can, because they're not spending time with you, they don't get to see all your idiosyncrasies. They're getting to see like the really efficient version of you. Do you feel like that helps you or hinders you in terms of getting your next job?
I'm the same dummy on Zoom that I am in real life. I'm gonna be honest. As y'all can probably begin to see right now. I mean, like, I definitely come to work, but like, we gotta have a good time too. So I think as people get more comfortable, I think people's freak flags begin to fly a little more. I don't know if that's the same on the for my friends on the dramatic side, where you guys get larger script fees than us that you shouldn't get, but whatever. But
The
yeah, you
scripts are
just
longer,
gotta.
Richard. They're
Here
longer.
we go. Rivalry.
Hey man, like no, we all good. It's all love. But you gotta have a good time with it, man. I'm sorry, I'm taking us off track. I think you just and like I think a lot of people have said you just gotta. It's maybe a little harder, but you gotta just try to seek it out. You gotta try to seek it out. Maybe if you can swing it financially, I think maybe it's worth making the trip out there for a week or two to where the room is, to like get that in-person time and then, make the most of it when you're there.
Have you felt the pressure to be more extroverted and to, pop out more in a Zoom session as Raelle was talking about before?
I have a funny thing. I wouldn't say I felt more pressure, but I feel like we're more present in a way that isn't always fun. I can think of times when someone said something and I would literally lean forward because I'm thinking, and the showrunner's like, "Yeah, Kara," and I was like, I literally didn't have a pitch. I just moved my head. It's just like everybody's so hyper aware of everything, which can be a little bit funny, but it's a different feeling.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Well,
that body language is so. I mean, that's just I'm sure so many people have said it, but like in a room, is like you can kind of sit off to the side and kind of like not be making direct eye contact, but we're all making direct eye contact. So that's what I want. I feel like I'm like speaking to Congress or something.
I feel like though, and I don't know about you guys though. Like, it depends if the show is longer. Like, I feel like we were on the season of Grownish that me and Steve did for like 1,000 years because it was split up between the strike and everything or whatever. But like, you wind up at a certain point where like people are taking the laptop with them to the kitchen or whatever, or they're like talking to you from over here, and like you just hope people to. I think that kind of helps in a weird way though, because it's like the walls kind of come down a little bit, and it begins to feel like not like a regular room, but the Zoom room begins to find a personality.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So it sounds like the walls do come down and you are able to be your authentic selves, even though we're all virtual.
Hopefully, I think, hopefully, like you get used to somebody's kids running in and interrupting or whatever. Like, you never want it to happen. Like when you're trying to be locked in, there are those moments when you gotta like tell your roommate or your partner or your whatever, like, hey, yo, we ain't playing around right now. We gotta be locked in. You understand? But like, yeah, you kind of find it, I think. I like to think so at least.
So do you all prefer a remote or a hybrid room now, or do you wish for the days of where everyone was all together?
Well, on season 5 of Grownish, we started hybrid, and then I moved to upstate New York, and I got asked back for the last season, knowing I would not be there most of the time. So that was like, oh, cool. I'm not coming a lot, right? And they're like, yeah, okay, good. I found all these great, especially being on a different time zone, like proof of concept of being a hybrid worker. Like, hey, that scene that we were having trouble with, I did a draft of it this morning. So when you come in, we can work off that rather than start from scratch. Yes, sometimes it's 6 o'clock there is 9 o'clock here, but that's few and far between when you can just have so much more time and just be you have someone ready to start right at 10 who can just bring some answers.
Yeah.
And my thought on it real quick, I feel like, no, you're about to say something, so I'll be quick, but it kind of tag teams on what Steve was saying. I feel like with the 9 o'clock thing, like if you're in a different time zone, to me, you gotta just eat that. Like that's how I look at it as. Like not even like I chose to move, and if I'm gonna be here and it's 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, because that's what the work needs. That's what the work needs, and you're never gonna hear me complain about it. And I tell my showrunners, like you need me in the room, fam, I'm there. What we need to do, you know what I mean? If I gotta fly out that's to me part of the cost of doing business, to have the luxury to attempt to do remote work. So yeah, I'm sorry. No, go ahead. My bad.
No, I was just gonna say echo something you said earlier, which is I'm if possible, the dream scenario would be hybrid because it's especially in person in the beginning, because I think then you can really just get kind of like you were saying, Steve, earlier, like if in the beginning you can just really get a feel for everybody, and then like, more increasingly as the show goes on, I think remote's more okay just because like I think you can be a lot more efficient. You guys know each other, you kind of know, what you need to do, and the hours can be reduced. But yeah, hybrid would be the ideal, I
Yeah,
think.
the time in advance before whoever the room is goes wrong, I think it's just so huge because it's like that way when like somebody blows up your pitch that you thought was awesome, you're not like, I hate that person in the upper
Yeah.
right box over there. They're the worst. You're like, nah, man, that's Amanda. You guys won on the lot walk and you talked about how you ran into like Brad Pitt that one time on the Sony lot or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that stuff is huge, I feel like.
Plus, you know how tall everyone is.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I know
Yeah.
that's always a funny thing when you're like, oh my God, you're a giant. But
It's like, yeah.
yeah, if I preference, I guess my preference would be if I had to choose, it would be an in-person. But I think the ideal scenario actually is hybrid. Even though I get really exhausted from Zoom kind of quickly, that's just me, and I have to kind of work through that. But I love the idea that people don't all have to live in LA. So it really gives you also, as like showrunners, you can hire writers from many different places, and I think that that's pretty exciting. But yeah, I feel like there should be some in-person time.
Definitely. I agree with that. I co-sign that entirely. Yeah.
Well, this ties into kind of the last segment of our discussion, which is not living in LA. So have any of you worked in rooms where it was primarily in person, but one or two writers zoomed in? And also, when you talk to your reps about jobs, do you feel like it's an impediment or completely a nothing burger that you don't live in LA or New York? And
Well,
can
yeah,
you
Um,
Richard and I were at the end of the table on a screen. When I was there the first week, I was going to go another week, and then there was a COVID outbreak, so I stayed here. And then he would go back for longer periods, but it it uh, it really just worked. I don't think anyone would say that our being there felt any different. After a while, people said it felt like we were in the room. Um, and then again, like I said, it allowed other
what
people to do that.
what helped with that, I think also does, and this was well, Grown-ups was probably the only show I feel like that. Well, no, single drunk female. Grown-ups, they had a proper Zoom setup. And what I
Yeah,
mean by that is like, which was huge, I think. And like, if I ever ran a show where we were hybrid or whatever, like they had like a big, like 60-inch, not only
Oh,
just like a
nice.
television with a laptop,
Oh,
but like a proper, like it was like an
screen?
$8,000 like teleconferencing screen, which
wow, that's
like
cool.
sounds obvious, but our good friends over at Disney were willing to spend the money on or whatever. And like it had a good mic and a good speaker for the most part, so they could really
That's a
see us. And
huge
like
difference.
when they looked at us, I mean, for me, it was not great that they saw a 60-inch version of me, but like they can really see you. You know what I mean? It wasn't like for them, it was like looking at it like just what's the laptop on the other end of the table saying? So I think
Yeah,
that even
totally.
helped a lot, Beef. As rudimentary as that sounds. So I would encourage that if I'm not in a position of power, but I think that helps a lot as well. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And Stephen and Richard, have you ever said to your reps, I only want to do a remote job?
No, not for
I
me.
asked him. I go, "Is this hindering anything, despite the fact that no one's working?" And it was no, like it hasn't been an issue that you're where you are. So
Yeah, I feel like I always make it clear, in my generals or whatever it is that like, some people know, some people don't. Like typically like when I'm in my office, my giveaway is that I have a fireplace behind me. So people are like, are you in LA? Like, and then I'm like, no, I'm not. But I make it clear that like, whenever you need me, however long you need me, I'm there. Like I had a pitch a couple weeks ago and that I flew in person for that. It felt like it was worth it. We were gonna be there with the buyers or blah 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 blah. So I came in person for. So I think you kind of begin to find the moments when it's worth going in person. Um, but yeah, again, like everything, I keep saying, and I feel like I'm a broken record, but you just kind of figure it out, hopefully.
mhm.
And do you feel like the future trend will be hybrid rooms where they actually have people come in like 2 days a week, but the other 3 days you're not there? Or is it hybrid in the sense that you all get together or in the beginning and then you all go off and you come together again? I guess it depends what your definition of hybrid is. And what do you see as the trend?
I think
don't really-
whatever, yeah.
I don't know either.
You go for it, Stephen.
I feel like whatever power the showrunner has with the studio will determine what happens. If they want their people there every day, that's what will happen. If they say, you know what, I'm going to live far away and I'll come in once a month, that's what it'll be. Really, that's been the history of everything. So I think that's probably how it will go.
I mean, what have you seen in your own careers? What do you see the tendency towards?
I feel like I see it drifting mostly toward in person or versions of in person. I think I don't feel that I'll just be straight. I don't think I'm in a position in my career where I can be like, it's Zoom or nothing for me. You know what I mean? So I go into it with the understanding that frankly, there's probably going to be a job where I got to be in LA for 3 months and I'm flying home on the weekends and stuff like that or whatever. And like, again, if that's what the job takes, is the job takes. That's my mentality that I take toward it. And I'm trying to work toward to be in a position where I have a little bit more flexibility on that, maybe I'm on the copium, but I do think there are showrunners like some of the ones we had here tonight that, maybe there'll be 10 or 15% that are either Zoom or hybrid or some version of that or whatever. I think there are definitely showrunners that want to try it. I think people are still, like B said, it's if they're going to let you or not,
Yeah. So we're still in a world where in person is the norm.
I think it tends to be the default. I don't know. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I mean, again, there are hardly any rooms right now, but yeah, as recently as
that's a different Zoom. That's a different
very different big Zoom.
Join us next month for the Zoom on no work.
But yeah, I mean, and I think that has to do with probably people just do what they're used to.
Yeah.
So it's like, we don't have to think so much about it anymore because of the protocols. So we're just going to go back to our set ways. I think that has to be more about people in power, showrunners pushing for it more, for it to become kind of more widespread.
It definitely seems to be more of a generational issue.
I think so.
I feel like there's more of and I don't work in drama as much, so but y'all telling me, I feel like there's more potential for it to take hold in drama than it is comedy. I think a lot of comedy people, and there might be 10% of something that you don't get from not being in person in comedy, maybe, so there's some truth to it for sure. I think some people, they just feel that there's something that's missing. I'm gonna say it. Some showrunners just like the whole court. I'm gonna be real with you. They just like the whole court.
There's that.
As is their right. Let me be clear. As is their right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can't hold court, the same way. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I don't work for people that don't. I have worked for folk that don't want to go home to their families. So we gonna be here. So if you don't want to be with your family, why you go to Zoom at home from not be with the family? You go into the office and I'm bringing y'all with me. So it's just like, I'm being too real. See, it's 10 o'clock over here. You getting too much realness from me.
I was gonna say, is that still a thing? Showrunners that don't want to go home to their families. I know that was really a reason why I kind of stayed out of TV for a while, at least for myself, because that was exactly what I was afraid of.
I mean, yeah, if you have this is not unrelated. If you're doing 2 jobs, which none of us do right now, try to work for the person that has a happy home life. That's real talk.
That's such a good point.
Real talk.
Continuing on real talk, do you feel like not living in LA is better for you as a writer in terms of your health and state of mind? I know that definitely amongst my friends and I, we have like a weekly conversation about where we should move, whether it's Scotland or Portugal or Jeju or, someplace that has like, Italy where they're selling homes for €1. And so it's kind of like, does the professional writer really need to be in LA or New York anymore? What do you think?
For their art,
talk first.
For their art, no.
For the art and career.
But for the paycheck, maybe. I mean, it's kind of I think that I know I moved here for the better of my family and that's caused better for everybody. Happy family, happy writer. So then the work's better. But I think that I could do that because I'd built relationships that are lasting outside of that geography.
So how long were you in LA before you decided to move?
20 years.
So a good chunk of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely if you're trying to break in or if you're super early on, I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions to every rule, but I think you're going to be swimming upstream if you're going to be like, I'm going to do it, and I haven't really broken in, and I haven't really built that network from afar. I think it's going to be difficult. I think you're making an already harder, difficult task more difficult on yourself, I think, in my opinion. Now,
Yeah.
that said, I'm
If
sure people do it, but go ahead,
Yeah.
please.
For sure. Oh no, just to piggyback on that, something that my agent said to me really recently stuck with me. He said people right now are really looking for any reason to say no.
Yeah.
So it's just something to bear in mind when you're trying to break in, that like any way you can make it easier for someone to say yes to you, you're gonna benefit.
Right.
That's facts.
Yep.
Yep.
And do you think there's still a difference between New York and LA, particularly for TV?
I mean, I think it was always you were going to have better luck out here just because, and I mean, LA, sorry, because there are just so many more rooms out here. And there was a period like in the mid-aughts where there was this tax credit. So several LA shows came out there, but it was only like 8 or 9. And then the following year, they were all gone. I mean, it's much harder to find rooms in New York. There are a couple, there are some, but I think you already have to have a foothold in LA before you're going to be called up to interview for those.
Yeah.
That's just
Like I
my
know that
opinion.
a friend, I think that's right. Go ahead, Noah, please.
Well, yeah, I'm just adding to that. I think because I was trying to form some sort of answer off of all your answers, but I agree with you, Kara. I think however you can swing it, if there's some way you can keep some sort of foothold in LA, whether that's you come here twice a year and just take meetings with, set a bunch of meetings with executives or producers, whatever, or see a bunch of writer friends. If there's any way to do that, I think any way you can keep sort of a foothold, however much or little, I think will just to add to everyone will just I think it will definitely not hurt you. It might not really help you, but it won't hurt you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the thing that's encouraging, this is one of the things that I felt like allowed for me to move because, like we all kind of hate generals and rarely, if ever, do they directly lead to a job in the immediate, but they do kind of in the aggregate tend to build and help to something or whatever. And like one thing I think that the pandemic did, from a general meeting perspective was I do think, at least in my experience, the default for almost every general I've had has been Zoom, and when I saw that trend kind of begin to emerge, I felt like, okay, maybe I can do this, like maybe like, because I kind of tend to think of those generals as like the maintenance of a career, for lack of a better term, in between jobs and stuff. And for me, at least in my experience, that's been true. I mean, there's been times when I've been out in LA, like I was out in LA for Grownish, and I had generals, and I was like, I'll come in, and they were like, no, Zoom, please. You know what I mean? Because I think for better or for worse, for executives, they can churn through us quicker. You know what I mean? Sometimes that means they're on emails or they're on phones or whatever. And, like I will actually joke with people. I'm like, oh, what's on the email? You know what I mean? Sometimes you just got to do what you got to do to grab people's attention. You know what I mean? I don't know if that was a good idea or not, but like you're memorable to some extent. You know what I mean? For sure. They met me again later. So whatever, but like, I think, I think so that was one thing that was encouraged. I think like once you kind of get in and you kind of have built that base or whatever, maybe you worked on a couple of shows or you sold a couple of movies, whatever that is. I think there is a real pathway to splitting between the two or finding whatever your version of hybrid looks like.
Right. Has anyone worked for an international showrunner or international or national showrunner who was remote, but you were in the room?
Not me.
I mean, I did a version of that. The last year I was on, I did the production writing for the show. So I was living out it was in New Zealand, so I was living there. So that was sort of a situation where you're there, but also the specific alchemy of that was, it was a show called Sweet Tooth, and it was we got a second and third season renewal back to back. So basically, it was all hands on deck. So we had to basically be there to do rewrites for seasons 2 production while also having the room for season 3. So it was basically all hands on deck.
New Zealand.
Wow.
That's how long were you in New Zealand, bro?
About like 20, or no, maybe like, no, not 20, like maybe like 12-ish months, some kind of.
Dang.
Wow.
What island were
That's
you
insane.
on? South or North or South Island?
No, it was North Island because it was in Auckland. There's
All right,
South
I'm
Island's
sorry.
beautiful.
I won't derail the
No,
Zoom anymore, Kim. I apologize. I had to know. I went on my honeymoon in New Zealand, so I'm like horribly jealous now. Man, dang. All right, that's what's up.
oh, cool. Where did you go to?
We'll hit it up off chat. We'll hit it up off chat. We'll talk off chat. We'll talk off chat. I'll hit you up. We'll email.
Well, this has been terrific. We're a little bit early, but I feel like we've exhausted all the nooks and crannies of having a remote writer's life. Is there anything else that you would like to add, or is there anything that I've missed that you think needs to be discussed with our viewership, I guess, because since we're all visual now?
No.
If someone gives you a task in a remote room, homework, whatever, do it.
Oh, for sure. That's very
Yeah.
good.
Do it well.
Yeah. Be on time. That sounds dumb,
Yeah.
but like
on time.
gotta be on time if you're in the Zoom room. Got to be.
You came
No?
from over there.
Yeah, for sure.
Be on time.
For sure. I feel like I think for me, if you're in a Zoom room, I think etiquette is really important. Like there have been times early in the show for me where like even if I was like a kind of an upper level person, like I would like, kind of have as a joke, but also have serious, I'll like raise my hand and like just get in queue. You know what I mean? Like so people know to like I saw Richard had something, and eventually people you do begin to learn people's faces when they have an idea or whatever. You'd be like, oh, like blah, blah, blah. But like, I think etiquette and whatnot is important, and you just try to like find your spots to just kind of get in and, put it out there. And then, if they go for it, they go for it. If not, they don't, because I think harping on a point or an idea that has been passed on is even more prominent on Zoom than it is in real life. You know what I mean? So, offer it up. If they don't want it, keep it moving,
Go.
It sounds like the same rules of engagement, but amplified.
I
Yeah.
think so.
Great way to
To
say it.
me, yeah, it's a great way of saying it.
All right. Well, you guys and Gal have been great, and we so appreciate your time and your wisdom. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I'm just going to check the Q&A to see if I've missed anything. Someone's probably waving their hands frantically saying, ask my question. Let's see here. Okay. So this is kind of pre-room. Would you find anything very different about pitching remotely? I'm assuming you pitch with a pitch deck, or you tell me how is your experience of it lately?
You're talking about pitching in the room or pitching like a show?
Pitching a show, so pre-room.
Oh. Yeah.
I mean, just to jump in, this is just my personal opinion. I hate pitching on Zoom. Like I cannot stand it. And it's kind of to what Richard was joking about earlier, is because like you can kind of see them like they're like, and they're just, like tackling emails and whatever. So I like, or if there's any way you can swing it, I like in room because it's like much more, or in person because it's just much more direct and like they have to keep your attention. But that's just me. I know probably way more writers who actually love it because then they can share their deck
Right.
in real time. They can also, or this, they can also they don't have to memorize the whole pitch. They can just read it and it doesn't look like they're looking at a thing. So I would say I know more writers who really prefer that. Just personally, I just can't stand it. I hate it.
Yeah. I prefer it on Zoom.
Right.
Strangely, because I feel like because people are doing their little things, but I love how like they mute themselves. I feel like it's much easier for me to kind of go into my zone and not be as aware. I'm like, whatever, they can be bored, but I'm just thinking about my pitch. Whereas if I'm in the room, I'm like, why did you look at your blueberry muffin? Like I think I'm too hyper aware of people's bodies, and I'm like, oh, they're bored already. Fuck. I think I'm sorry, cursing. Nobody's been cursing, and suddenly I'm throwing
It's on
those F-bombs.
record. It's on record, so we got you
Record
now.
it.
Forever.
Record it. But yeah, that's just been my experience. And to be honest, like I'm still relatively young in my career, so I only did a little bit of pitching before COVID happened. So I'm actually more used to it at this point too, which I think might be part of why I prefer it.
Right.
Keep
I
it
think
brief.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Keep it. I mean, I think if it's in general, this is probably true in real life, but like that's so correct, Steve. Like 20 minutes or less, for a comedy, drama people, I would say, honestly, probably I would imagine as close to 20 minutes if it's still
You want to
possible.
try
I
to
know
keep it around 20. Yeah.
you want to
Because
try,
it's
man.
hard.
And
It's hard.
it's hard. And then feed it and build it into like the Q&A portion after, I would say. I think also like probably definitely run it with some people watching it on Zoom if you can, even record yourself. You probably got to try to bring, I think, 15 to 20% more energy on Zoom than you would need to in real life, I think, because it can be really easy to come across as like monotone or whatever, in my opinion. But like I pitched the show and had the good fortune to sell it like in season 1 of the pandemic. And then I pitched another one more recently that went well. We went out in person for that. So that was really cool to be able to go in person. 'Cause I prefer in person personally, but it can be done, you know. I don't know that you need the deck and all that stuff. I feel like sometimes because somebody might feel differently than that. I can let somebody else weigh in on that. I think sometimes too much emphasis is put on these visual aids and stuff or whatever. I'm like old school though in the sense I'm like, send me to war with my words, man. That's how I feel, and then let's go, but there's all kind of ways to do all kinds of things. I recognize that. So, yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone pitch without a deck as well?
Yeah, I mean,
Oh.
I'll totally agree with that because I in the past I used to have these like really long decks with all this stuff and it was just way too much. Just have a conversation. What's the idea? Who's the main character? What are like the 3 or 4 storylines? What are some fun ideas? Just keep it like Steve said, just keep it brief. I think it's just way easier to digest.
Just talk to them like you telling somebody about it and just go pitch the thing and then sell it, man. Like seriously.
But it's like, but I think it's the same kind of thing with like keeping it small and compact. Like I did a pitch on Monday where I didn't do a pitch deck. I literally was like, here's a concept board if you want to look at that. But then it was really about what I was saying. So it's like a kind of like an in between.
Mhm.
But I think we just put too much effort, I think, sometimes on the like this sort of new technological showmanship. And I don't know that that's necessarily a good place to put our energy.
I totally agree with that.
Great. Well, this was very instructive. This was terrific. I thank you so much for your time and for sharing and for being so frank with us. And I love the fact that you were real, Richard, and helped all of us get real too. That's what that's the point of all of this.
That's what I try to do in the room. So
It's Richard's special,
man. It is. I'm a dummy. So yeah.
No, you ain't. Okay, Tracy and Christina, do you want to come on and say anything before I let our panelists go?
I just want to thank everyone for spending their times with us, especially the people who are not in PST. Thank you so much. And I hope people are feeling hopeful about this. I know how not great the industry is right now. We're all surviving till 25, and hopefully we will all be in rooms, whether they be in person or in real life. But so
we're gonna make it. I believe.
We're gonna make it. Thank you, Kim, for organizing all of this. This is kind of Kim ran with this. So thank you, Kim. This is amazing.
It was my pleasure. It was great to meet all of the writers. Thank you so much, everyone.
Great to meet all of you
everybody.
guys.
Take care. Nice to meet y'all.
Take care.